April 29, 1945, Dachau, Bavaria. 23-year-old Lieutenant Sarah Brennerman of the 45th Infantry Division, 157th Regiment, stands before the open gates of Kaufering IV, one of 11 satellite camps in the Dachau complex. She's a signals officer from Philadelphia, daughter of a Presbyterian minister, and nothing in her training has prepared her for this moment. The smell hits first human waste, rotting flesh, typhus. She covers her mouth. Beside her, Corporal Marcus Washington, a 9-year-old medic from Harlem, has already vomited twice. But it's not the skeletal bodies that will haunt Sarah for the next 60 years. It's what happens when they unlock the women's barracks. Inside are 247 German women, not prisoners, guards, administrative staff, nurses who selected the ill for death, kitchen workers who determined rations. They're wearing clean uniforms, their hair is combed, some have lipstick on. When the American soldiers throw open the doors and shout, "You are free to go," the women don't move. They stand there, staring, as if the Americans are speaking a foreign language, because in their minds, they've done nothing wrong. But before we dive deeper into this incredible untold story that history tried to bury, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. The machinery of belief. To understand what happens next, you need to understand who these women were. They weren't monsters born from nightmare. They were ordinary, achingly, terrifyingly ordinary. 28-year-old Ilse Hoffmann from Munich had been a school teacher before the war. She taught children their ABCs, how to tie their shoes, how to sing folk songs. In 1941, she volunteered for the SS Helferinnenkorps, the SS Women's Auxiliary, because it paid better than teaching and came with extra food rations for her aging mother. By 1943, she was supervising work details at Kaufering IV, determining which emaciated women could still swing a pickaxe and which should be sent back to the main camp. Sent back meant death. Everyone knew this. Ilse knew this. But she never thought of it as murder. She thought of it as efficiency. 31-year-old Margaret Schiller had been a pharmacist's daughter from Stuttgart, engaged to be married before her fiancé died at Stalingrad. She joined the camp administration to serve the Reich in his memory. Her job was simple: record the names of arriving prisoners, assign them numbers, confiscate their belongings. She worked in a clean office with a typewriter. She never entered the barracks. She never saw the gas chambers at the main camp. She knew they existed, but she told herself it wasn't her responsibility. She was just keeping records. 26-year-old Frieda Krantz, from a farming family in Bavaria, worked in the camp kitchens. She prepared meals for the SS officers and guards, real meals with meat and butter and bread. The prisoners received watery soup with 600 calories a day. Frieda saw them grow skeletal. She saw them collapse. She watched the bodies pile up outside the barracks every morning. But she told herself she was just following orders about rations, that someone higher up made these decisions, that she was just a cook. Here's what the records show. These women weren't coerced. They volunteered, they received salaries, they took vacation days, they wrote cheerful letters home about the important work they were doing. In a letter dated November 1943, Ilse Hoffmann wrote to her sister, "The work is hard but necessary. We are building the future. You should be proud of me." They believed truly, completely believed, that they were the good people, that the prisoners were criminals, subversives, enemies of civilization itself. They'd been told this in training, they saw it in every newspaper, they heard it in every radio broadcast, and the camp system was designed to reinforce this belief at every moment. Think about that. These women went to work every day. They did paperwork, they cooked meals, they supervised labor, and at night they went back to their quarters, washed up, maybe read a book, and slept soundly. Because in their minds, they were patriots, heroes even. Everything in their world told them so. April 29th. The gates open. The Americans of the 45th Infantry Division arrive at Kaufering IV around 2:30 p.m. They've been fighting since landing in Sicily in 1943, pushing through France and into Germany. They've seen combat, they've seen death, they've never seen anything like this. Captain Robert Harmon, 32, a lawyer from Chicago, is the first officer through the gates. He immediately orders his men to start evacuating the sick. Private William Crossland, 21, from a farm in Iowa, finds a barrack filled with women who weigh less than 70 pounds. Some are already dead. He can't tell which. He starts crying and can't stop. But there's another section of the camp the soldiers discover, the administrative compound. Clean buildings, gardens, a kitchen with actual food in it, and inside, the German staff. Lieutenant Sarah Brennerman is ordered to secure the women's quarters. She enters with Corporal Washington and Private Helen Kowalski, 24, a Polish-American nurse from Detroit whose grandparents fled Poland in 1920. Helen speaks some German. The room has 40 women in it. They're seated on bunks, standing by windows, organizing papers. They look up when the Americans enter. No fear, no shame, just confusion. Sarah draws her service pistol, more out of protocol than threat. "You are under arrest as enemy combatants," she says in English. Helen translates. One of the women later identified as Ilse Hoffman actually laughs. Not cruelly, just genuinely confused. "Arrest?" she says in German. "For what? We were just doing our jobs." Sarah stares at her. "Your jobs?" Another woman, Marguerite Schiller, stands up. She's eloquent, educated, calm. "We are administrative personnel," she says in careful English. "We kept records. We maintained order. We followed regulations. We are not combatants." Helen Kowalski's hand starts shaking. Her grandfather's entire village was liquidated in 1942. "Do you know what happened in this camp?" she asks in German, her voice rising. "Do you know what you've done?" Marguerite looks genuinely puzzled. "We processed prisoners according to regulations," she says. "We maintained discipline. That was our duty." Sarah feels reality tilting. She's standing in a camp where thousands died of starvation, disease, and systematic murder, where corpses are stacked like lumber, where the living are barely distinguishable from the dead. And these women think they were just doing paperwork. "You're free to go," Sarah finally says, holstering her pistol. "The gates are open. Leave." "The women don't move," I said. "Leave," Sarah shouts. Ilse Hoffman stands up slowly. "Leave to where?" she asks. "This is our post. We haven't received orders to abandon our positions." Marcus Washington, who's been silent until now, starts laughing. It's not a happy sound. It's the laughter of a mind breaking. "Orders?" he says. "Lady, the war is over. Germany is defeated. Your whole world is ash. And you're worried about orders?" Frida Krantz, the cook, speaks up. She's small, round-faced, looks like someone's aunt. "But what about dinner?" she asks. "The officers will need their evening meal. There are no officers left. They fled hours ago." But Frida doesn't seem to comprehend this. Or perhaps she doesn't want to. The education begins. What happens over the next 3 days becomes one of the most documented and most suppressed encounters between American forces and German camp personnel. Because the women won't leave, the Americans make them stay. But not in their clean quarters. They're moved into the prisoners' barracks. The ones that still smell of death. The ones with bloodstains on the walls. The ones where women just like them. Jewish women, Polish women, French resistance fighters, Romani women, had died by the hundreds. "Sleep here tonight," Captain Harmon orders. "Maybe you'll understand what your job actually was." The German women are horrified, not at the atrocity, at the conditions. "This is unsanitary," Margaret protests. "There could be disease. This violates Geneva Convention standards for prisoner treatment." Think about that sentence. Let it sink in. She's worried about her rights under the Geneva Convention, in a camp where prisoners had no rights at all, where they were worked to death, starved, beaten, murdered as policy. But here's where the story takes its most disturbing turn. The American soldiers want these women to see, to understand, to feel something, so they make them do it. On April 30th, Captain Harmon orders the German staff to bury the dead, all of them, the bodies piled outside the barracks, the corpses in the mass graves, the skeletal remains in the crematorium that never quite managed to keep up with the killing. The women are given shovels and gloves, they're marched out under guard, and they're ordered to lift the bodies, carry them to graves, and bury them properly. Ilse Hoffman vomits after touching the first corpse. It's a woman, maybe 20 years old, who died of typhus 2 days before liberation. Her body is still warm, her eyes are open. "I can't," Ilse says in German, backing away. I can't do this. Private Kowalski gets in her face. You watched them die, she says, her voice like ice. You made them work until they collapsed. You denied them food. You sent them to their deaths. And now you can't even touch them? Frida Krantz is crying. But we didn't kill them, she sobs. We were just following regulations. The decisions came from above. We had no choice. Sergeant James Mitchell, 29, from Atlanta, speaks up. He's black. He served in a segregated army. He's fought for a country that treats him as a second-class citizen, and even he is stunned by what he's hearing. No choice, he says quietly. Lady, there's always a choice. You chose this. Every day you chose this. The German women bury 183 bodies over 3 days. They dig graves with their own hands. They lift corpses that weigh almost nothing because there's nothing left to them. They see faces. They see numbers tattooed on arms. They see wedding rings still on skeleton fingers, and some of them start to crack. The transformation and its limits. On May 2nd, something happens. Ilse Hoffman, the former school teacher, is carrying the body of a young girl, maybe 12 years old, who died of starvation. The girl's body is so light it feels like holding air. And as Ilse lays her in the grave, she sees something in the dirt. A small wooden doll, hand-carved, probably smuggled into the camp by the girl's mother. Ilse picks it up, stares at it, and something inside her shatters. She sits down in the dirt beside the grave and starts keening a sound without words, pure grief and horror and recognition. Sarah Brennerman, supervising the burial detail, walks over and stands above her. Did you know her name? Sarah asks quietly. Ilse shakes her head, tears streaming down her face. I never asked their names. They were just numbers. We were told they were criminals, enemies. I thought we were protecting Germany. Sarah crouches down beside her. What do you think now? Ilse looks up at her with hollow, destroyed eyes. I think I've been in hell, she whispers. And I was one of the devils. This is the moment the Americans are hoping for. The breaking, the recognition, the admission. But it doesn't happen to all of them. Marguerite Schiller never breaks. Over the 3 days of burial duty, she remains coldly composed. She does the work mechanically, efficiently, as if it's just another administrative task. When Captain Harmon confronts her on May 3rd, demanding to know how she can remain so unmoved, she gives an answer that will appear in multiple witness testimonies. I did my job according to law, she says in perfect English. What happened to prisoners was the result of military necessity during wartime. It was not my responsibility to question policy. I was a loyal citizen following the legal orders of my government. Robert Harmon stares at her. Legal, he says? You think this was legal? It was the law of Germany, Marguerite says simply. And I am German. He has no response. Because in her mind, she's right. In her framework, she's innocent. She followed the rules of her society. The fact that those rules were monstrous, that her society was built on genocide, this doesn't compute for her. Because to accept it would be to accept that her entire identity, her entire worldview, her entire sense of self is built on evil. And some people can't do that, won't do that. They'd rather stay in the lie. The trials and the silence. The records show that 247 German women were detained at Kaufering IV and the wider Dachau complex in late April and early May, 1,945. Most were released within weeks. The U.S. military government determined that without direct evidence of specific murders, administrative and support staff could not be prosecuted under existing military law. Only 19 women were eventually tried at the Dachau trials between 1,945 and 1,947. Of those, 7 were convicted. 4 received prison sentences of less than 5 years. 3 received life imprisonment. Not 1 was executed. Compare that to the 41,500 people who died in the Dachau camp system, to the women who were worked to death on 600 calories a day, to the children who died of typhus while guards stood by. The vast majority of the women who worked at camps like Kaufering simply went home. They changed their names, they moved to new towns, they married, they had children, they became teachers again, nurses again, clerks again. They resumed being ordinary, and they almost never spoke of what they'd done, but a few did. In 1987, British historian Margaret Brennan Gibson, no relation to Lieutenant Sarah Brennerman, published a groundbreaking study titled The Women of Dachau, Administrative Complicity and Moral Erasure. She tracked down 34 former female camp staff members, then in their 60 seconds and 70 seconds. Only 8 agreed to be interviewed. Of those 8, only 1 expressed genuine remorse. It was Ilse Hoffmann, then 71, living in a small apartment in Hamburg under her married name. In an interview dated June 1987, she said, "I remember that girl with the doll. I see her every night. People ask me how we could have done it, how we didn't know. But we did know. Of course we knew. We just told ourselves it wasn't our fault, that we were small people, powerless, just doing what we were told. But that's a lie. We were murderers who never pulled a trigger. We killed with paperwork, with rationed food, with closed eyes. And the world let us go home because we were women, because we were just administrators, because genocide is only genocide when men in uniforms do it. But I knew. God forgive me, I knew. The legacy we inherit. What happened to Lieutenant Sarah Brennerman? She left the Army in 1946 and became a social worker in Philadelphia. She never married. She developed severe insomnia that lasted until her death in 2003. In her papers, donated to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, there's a letter she wrote in 1979 but never sent, addressed to no one in particular. The gates were open. They could have left. But they didn't want to leave because leaving meant admitting what they were. It's easier to stay in the system, even when the system is evil, than to step outside and face what you've been part of. I've seen this my whole life since then. People who cling to cruelty because admitting its cruelty would destroy their sense of themselves. The Germans didn't invent this. They just perfected it. Today, there is a small memorial at the Dachau concentration campsite. It lists the names of the dead, includes testimonies from survivors, displays photographs of the liberation. There is no mention of the women who wouldn't leave, no acknowledgement of the banality that enabled the horror, no reckoning with the thousands of ordinary people who made atrocity possible with typewriters and soup ladles and paperwork, because we still don't want to believe it. We want to think that evil looks like evil, that the people who enable genocide are monsters who cackle in the dark, that we would recognize it, that we would resist. But Ilse Hoffmann was a school teacher. Margaret Schiller was a pharmacist's daughter. Frida Krantz was a farmer's girl who just wanted to help. They were us. And that's the truth we still can't face. Marcus Washington, the young medic from Harlem who threw up at the gates of Kaufering IV, became a doctor after the war. He worked in inner-city hospitals for 40 years. He marched in Selma. He treated AIDS patients in the 1,980 seconds when other doctors refused. In an oral history recorded in 1993, he said something that should be carved in stone. At Dachau, I learned that you don't fight for freedom just on battlefields. You fight for it every single day, in every small decision about who deserves dignity and who doesn't. Those German women had 1,000 chances to choose differently. 1,000 moments where they could have said no, could have shown mercy, could have sabotaged the system even in tiny ways. They never did. Not because they were evil, but because they were comfortable. Evil doesn't need monsters. It just needs people who are comfortable enough not to care. We are living through an age of systems, of policies determined far above us, of regulations we're told to follow, of jobs we're just doing, of orders we're just obeying. The gates are open. Will we walk through them? Or will we stand there, confused, asking what we've done wrong, insisting we were just following the rules, waiting for someone to tell us what to do next? The women of Kaufering IV gave us their answer. Now we have to give ours. History doesn't repeat itself, but humanity does unless we choose every single day to be different.